Hi, everybody. It's the end of the day, and I hope you've had a fabulous day tour. You've probably heard this spiel 10 times already, well, 8 times anyway. But as you may already have heard, we cannot put on this festival without your support, without the support of the ushers, all of the volunteers, everybody who makes this such a special day. The venues are all here for us. This church has just been redone, so we're thrilled to be in it. So we want to just say it's a wonderful event for the Savannah Book Festival, of which I'm on the board of directors, to be able to give this gift to the community. As you may know, we've all been hit by inflation. Costs are up. Costs are up over 30% for the festival, and this is going to be unsustainable, keeping it a free festival Saturday. So I know I'm probably asking a lot at this point in time, but if you can, we hope you'll contribute on the way out, either in the yellow bucket or using, there's a Venmo code on the back of your program that you can use that as well. We do sincerely want to keep this free festival Saturday next year. Thank you.
Good afternoon and welcome to the final presentation of the day. My name is Sid Britt. This year's festival is presented by the Philip E. and Nancy B. Beekman Foundation, David and Nancy Citron, Robert Faircloth, the Courtney Knight Gaines Foundation, and the Gerald D. and Helen M. Stevens Foundation, with a special thanks for a grant from Georgia Humanities. We are especially grateful to an anonymous donor for sponsoring the Lutheran Church of Ascension Fellowship Hall today. Jenn Lyons will be signing festival purchase copies of her book in Telfair Square immediately following the presentation. I'm going to skip. I know you got your cell phones off. You understand no flash photography. And I will, though, pause for a minute on the, if you haven't done a survey, go ahead and please get online and answer the survey. We're definitely interested in the feedback. Jenn Lyons is with us today, courtesy of Austin and Marty Sullivan, as well as Jeff and Deb Warner. Jenn Lyons was a graphic artist and illustrator for 20 years before working as a video game producer on projects ranging from indie projects and slot machine games to AAA titles for EA. In 2020, she was nominated for the Outstanding Award for Best New Writer. Her 5-book Chorus of Dragons fantasy series began with The Ruin of Kings. Please give a Savannah welcome to Jenn Lyons.
There we go. I just want to reiterate, thank you. I know that this is the last slot of the day, which means that you being here took effort, because it must have been wonderfully tempting to just keep going. Sorry, I have to do this, and I apologize. It was the Astounding Award. And it's fine. And actually, I got nominated twice, so it was pretty cool. So I wanted to talk to you about something that is extremely important to me, and probably extremely important to you, given why you're here, and that's dragons. As said, I am the author of the 5-book epic fantasy series, A Chorus of Dragons, and all of my life, I have adored dragons. So I would like to tell you a little bit about, again, dragons, but also my first experiences with prophecy, because that is also a thing that features fairly heavily in my books. My first experience with prophecy happened when I was 5 years old. My mother, my stepfather, and I moved around a lot. We'll get back to that later. And because of that, I was that kid in the corner who was entering into school mid-semester, kind of getting stuck into the corner until the teacher could figure out what to do with me. And on this particular day of class, I was, first day at the new school, stuck in a corner with a stack of papers, stack of newsprint, blank newsprint, and some crayons. And basically told to keep myself busy. The rest of the class was doing art. And in particular, they were, I mean, we were 5 years old. They had been handed out photocopies of a picture and they were coloring it in. I mean, it was not like fancy art. It was 5-year-old art. This particular picture was a dragon wrapped around a castle. And I was not given a picture of a dragon wrapped around a castle. I was given blank paper and told to entertain myself. And 5-year-old me was pissed because I loved dragons. A few months before, my mother had taken me to see Sleeping Beauty, and I had cried when Maleficent died. And I had known I loved dragons. So, when the teacher wasn't looking, I took a Sharpie off of her desk. And when she came back to find out how I was doing, she was very startled and surprised because she didn't remember giving me a picture of that dragon wrapped around a castle. But I had one. And then she realized she hadn't. I had just redrawn it so that I could color it in with the crayons. And from that moment on, my destiny was sealed. I was an artist. A prodigy, gifted. That was what I was going to be doing. Everybody knew it. It wasn't questioned. It was just what fate had in store for me. I always knew I was going to be an artist. Everybody always told me I was going to be an artist. It took me a little while longer to figure out that that wasn't true. Or more to the point, that that wasn't necessarily the love of my life. But dragons. We'll head back to dragons real quick, because we're not done with that. When I was 9, Christmas time at a Thrifties. I don't know if you guys, do they have Thrifties out here? It's a drugstore, CVS kind of thing, right? And we were poor, so pretty much I would get to be allowed to go down the toy aisle and pick out one thing. And in this particular case, that one thing was a board game with a dragon on the cover called Dungeon. So I got that for Christmas, and Dungeon led me to another thing with dragons in it called Dungeons and Dragons. And by the time I was 10 years old, I was trying to co-opt every friend I had into playing the game, because dragons. When I was 12, the girls' club that I belonged to did a yearly big festival, and they decided that year that their theme was going to be fantasy. And 12-year-old me thought, my time has come. So they asked me, because everybody knew I was the artist, they asked me to draw a mural of a dragon. I drew Tiamat. I don't know if you're familiar, but Tiamat in Dungeons and Dragons is the 5-headed queen of evil. 5-headed dragon, queen of evil. And my stepfather was Assyrian. I had grown up immersed in Assyrian and Babylonian mythologies, also a Tiamat thing. So yeah, Tiamat, of course Tiamat. And they came to me a little concerned because it was this big 5-headed vicious looking dragon. And they said, Jennifer, we were kind of hoping that maybe you might be willing to draw a cute dragon. And 12-year-old me was furious. I said, dragons are not cute. I was a pretty stubborn kid, as it turned out. So yeah, that only continued. When I was 15, I created the first character that would eventually become a character in A Chorus of Dragons. And that was quite a number of years ago, 30 plus something years ago. And I've been working on the world building for that became the world building for that book for all that time. Which is wild to think about. I guess part of it was so that when people would ask me when I was a teenager and a little bit older, well, what are you ever going to do with that? You know, how's that ever going to be? How are you ever going to make a living doing that? Well, I have an answer now. They're mostly not around for me to tell, but I do have an answer now. And by the way, I did actually get over the cute thing. I mean, toothless is awesome. So, dragons can be cute. But at the time, I think I only had like Pete's dragon to go off of, and yeah, anyway. So, all of my life, I have written. You know, I would do pictures and then I would write about the pictures. But it didn't occur to me, even though, you know, I was probably, again, I think I was 12 the first time I decided I was going to write a novel. I do not remember what it was about. I do not have it. It is lost on an Apple IIe that has since probably ended up in a trash dump somewhere. But it just never occurred to me to write. That meant I could write a novel. I loved reading. I was that kid that would start at the A section of the science fiction and fantasy section of the school library and just worked my way through. Just reading every single book in order. And I wanted to make the covers. I wanted to illustrate the covers of the books. That, I thought, was what I was going to end up doing. It didn't occur to me that I could write them. And then my first husband dared me to write a book. You know, he noticed that I was always making these very elaborate background stories for characters. And, you know, so he put it like a dare. And I wrote a book. Do I have to mention it was terrible? I don't think I have to mention it was terrible. It was terrible, objectively terrible. You know, I was telling somebody just last night actually that I over-researched it. I probably put like 2 solid years of research. It was actually a science fiction story, by the way. It was not fantasy. 2 solid years of research into, you know, hyperspace theory, M theory, you know, engineering, mathematics, epidemiology, you name it. I was like deep diving into all of it. Very little of that actually turned out to be important in the book. But the prologue of this thing was like 20 pages of just exposition. As I was absolutely determined to make sure that everybody who read this thing knew that I had put this much effort into doing the research. Needless to say, I did not sell that book. But I eventually decided that I was not actually happy being an illustrator, and that I wasn't going to sell any books. But I kept writing them because it was fun to write them. So even if I didn't think that anybody was ever going to buy the books or that I was ever going to get a publishing deal, I had fun writing them. I had fun doing the world building. I had fun creating them. So I kept doing it. I decided to made the very deliberate decision to stop being, at the time it was an art director, and go into video games. I thought I was going to go into video games in the graphic design side of video games. Anytime you ever play a video game, you know, the little bar that shows you how much health you have left or whatever, there's somebody who has to go and design that. So I thought I was going to do that. To everyone's surprise, mine included, I ended up as a producer. It turned out that I was very good at organizing things, which was a shock to me because my whole life I have been the messiest person I've ever known. But it turns out when you know that you're the messiest person that you've ever known, you take steps. And I think it was about 11 years ago, I have lived in Los Angeles for most of my life. About 11 years ago, a job took me out to Atlanta. And I went from having a 2-hour commute to a 15-minute commute. Same distance traveled. 7 miles, by the way. 2 hours to go 7 miles in Los Angeles. Suddenly I had time to write. So I started doing that. And I wrote a couple of books, and I wrote The Ruin of Kings. And I remember showing that to a friend of mine, another writer, and he read it and he called me up and said, "If you do not get this traditionally published, I'm never talking to you again." He was pretty opinionated on that one. And so I was like, okay, well, I will try. I have had no luck in the past. I've gotten a lot of very polite, well, when I have gotten a reply, they've been very polite, but firm no's. But I'll try. And I tried 42 times. And nothing. And then about 6 years ago, a friend of mine messaged me out of nowhere and said, "I have found your agent. You must query him immediately. I'll wait." And she sends me a link to an agent's webpage. And I read through this guy, and he's looking for somebody who writes funny Terry Pratchett-style books, which, great, but that's not what I write. And she said, keep reading, keep reading. At the very, very end of a very long list of things that he was looking for, he said, "Oh, by the way, if you write epic fantasy with a cast of thousands and multiple appendices in the back and all kinds of maps, I also want to hear from you." And I went, oh, okay. So, but by that point, I knew I was not going to get published, right? That was not going to happen. I actually had a conversation with my boss at the time, where he said, "Hey, what happens when you get the big New York publishing contract? Are you going to leave?" And I said, "Eric, that's never going to happen. That doesn't happen. No, that's not happening. Don't worry about it." So, because I was so convinced that it wasn't going to happen, I broke every possible rule for writing a query, which, do you guys know what a query is? So, trying to find an agent is a bit like trying to find a prom date for someone that is out of state and you can only use postcards to mail back and forth. You're basically submitting a letter to somebody that you don't know, probably, that is a one-page, here's why my work is awesome, here's why you should represent me. And agents get absolutely inundated with these things. So it's extremely difficult to get just even past that first stage. They have so little time to look at these things. Well, I wrote a query that was not formal, not polite. I talked about dick jokes. I broke every rule. And he wrote me back immediately and said, please send me more. And I did, and a couple hours later, he wrote back and said, okay, send me the rest of it. And then 2 weeks later, he said, okay, I need your phone number. I want to call you. I was like, okay, well, this has never happened before, so this is wild. And I got him on the phone, and he said, I can't represent you right now. I'm like, okay, well, why are you here then? Like, well, because I think your book could be good enough that I could represent you. You just need to fix a few things. Would you possibly be willing to do that? This is called a revise and resubmit, by the way. It's not uncommon. And I said, maybe. What do you think needs to be fixed? And he told me. He spent 4 hours telling me. And I was really, really, really upset because I couldn't disagree with the thing he said. He'd nailed it. Everything that was wrong, all the things that I knew I needed to fix, but I had just kind of thought that nobody would notice, he'd noticed. So suddenly, not only did I have this really, really amazing feedback, but I had an agent that I was looking at an agent, I was like, this guy actually really gets me. Damn, okay, well, let's hope we can work this out. It worked out. He signed me after I sent the revisions back. And a week after he signed me, he said, you know, I'm sending out. And 2 weeks after that, he said, hey, we got our first offer in from Tor. It's a preempt, which is when a publishing house is trying to prevent something from going to bid. They'll try to get ahead of it. And then we got a preempt from Orbit. And then we got a preempt from Del Rey. And there was one other publisher. Anyway, point is, we ended up in a bidding war anyway because the preempts became a bidding war. So I ended up with a big publishing deal from New York. Yeah, anyway. If only it was that easy to if it was that easy to guarantee success. This will never happen, thus ensuring this happens. It's the only time in my life, guys. So that's how we ended up here today. You know, they signed the contract, and actually first Davy Ply, the woman who acquired Ruin of Kings, said, I need to see a series summary. Because at the time, there was an awful lot of, well, there still kind of is, let's just say there were fantasy series that weren't getting finished. So they wanted to be reassured that I actually had a plan, that I was going to be able to finish this thing. And when the whole thing started, they were like, well, so how many books do you need? And I said, 5. And they said, okay. I didn't realize at the time, because I didn't know enough, that was weird. That most of the time you only get a trilogy, if you get a trilogy. So people would be like, what's your secret? How'd you get them to agree to this? I was like, I just said that was what I needed. I don't know what to tell you. But so I wrote up a big series summary, and I turned it in, I signed the contract, and then Davey called me and said, none of this will work. Like, what do you mean? Like, I mean, you're going to have to do this completely differently. Like, okay, well, tell me what I need to change. And she did, and I got really mad. because everything she said was right. In point of fact, I made a shirt about it. It says Davy is right. She asked me to give her one for her husband. So I've gotten way off topic of dragons, haven't I? So actually, I'm going to veer sharply to the side for a second, as I think we can establish. I love dragons. I have opinions about dragons. Ask me about why wyverns aren't dragons. I've actually written articles about this. So the love of dragons. And the other thing that you got to understand about me is that when I was 19 years old, my mother sat me down and said, I've got good news and bad news. The bad news is that I have stage 4 breast cancer. And probably will live another 6 months. The good news is, remember how I told you you were an only child? I lied. You are, in fact, the youngest of 4 children. You have 2 sisters and a brother that you have never met, full siblings, and we are flying out to meet them next week. So, if I tell you, assuming you have not already read the series, I see you guys. If I tell you that A Chorus of Dragons, ultimately, besides being a fantasy story, is a story about defying destiny and the lies that family tell each other, with a lot of dragons mixed in, you will understand where that came from. Because while I don't believe in the adage of write what you know, I do believe that who you are as a writer will always come out in what you write. And did. So that's all about me. Actually, I remember telling my boss that I was going to need time off to do this and explaining the entire situation to her, as well as explaining the fact that my biological father was worked for the CIA. He did. And that my mother had stolen me and run off with me because I was the only only child she could carry when she had run because he was so abusive. She basically told me I was lying because there was no way that anybody could actually have that life. Crazy to not have made up. Yeah. So that happened. Having given you probably more information on my life story than you were expecting or wanting to know, I think I'm going to go to questions. Do you guys have any? When's that book coming out? Yeah, no, I don't think that one's quite. I may have taken some liberties on that. Just stretch things out a little bit. But yeah, if anybody's got any questions, you first.
So when you were asked how many series you would need, you said you need 5. How was your thought process in writing 5 books and like kind of spacing out the 5 books and how I guess where what I don't know how it really wrote it, how did you write those 5 books as you did? You just knew it was going to be 5 books.
Well, I had originally, so there's 4 main characters to the story. I know it may seem like there's more than that, but in theory, when it started, there were 4 main characters. And each one of those was going to get their own book. and then I was going to tie everything together with the fifth. And Davy correctly said, no, you're not. You're gonna stay focused on this particular main character, and he can have others that are helping him out, and he can have, you know, the three others that are doing stuff, but, you know, you cannot write what are essentially 4 independent books. And she was right. Once I got that into my head, then it became just a matter of plotting out. Do you guys know pantser versus plotter? Writers like to divide themselves into 2 camps. There's the plotters who outline everything out, and then there's the people who write by the seat of their pants. And I like to call myself a milestoner, because I'm terrible at doing what's expected of me. And a milestoner is, I don't actually have an outline, but I do have milestones that I want to hit. And I don't know how I'm going to hit them. I just know that I'm going to hit them. So I knew how the book was going to start, and the series was going to start, and I knew how the series was going to end. And then once I had those, I just had to figure out the milestones in between, and that pretty much divided up into the books. So
world building is my absolute favorite part of any book. It absolutely fascinates me. And you said that this, I really don't want to. Sorry.
I can hear, and I'll repeat what she asks.
Sorry, I lost my train of thought there. I really enjoy world building, and you said world building, like, this is a story that kind of has been with you for a really long time. So how did you come about these ideas, and what did you ultimately decide to put to paper? And, like, what was your just process on how to build your world?
Right. So she is asking, did everybody hear her? Okay. Never mind, then I don't need to repeat it. So I guess it won't be a surprise to say that ultimately, originally, this grew out of a D&D campaign, because it did. And when I decided to base a book out of it, I went, okay, well, now I need to scrub. Mostly scrub the traces of the D&D races and the D&D sort of feel off of the place. I kept the politics. And I am a person who, I over world build. I always have. You know, I have 14-some thousand years of history sitting in a wiki document, and you know, 6 languages, and just way more stuff than could possibly fit into even 1,000,000 words. Most of which readers will never see, but that's okay. They don't need to see it. It's just important for me to have it be there, and for me to know. And then it's the iceberg thing. You know, you create an iceberg, and your readers are only going to see the tip of the iceberg, but all the rest of it is still there and still supporting that. And it wouldn't feel authentic if it wasn't there. Does that mostly answer it, or?
Well, how did you decide what to include?
Oh, well, how did I decide what to include? The plot, mostly. I mean, like, really, there's stuff that didn't get included because it wouldn't have come up, right? So, fairly early on, I decided to make the series diegetic. And what I mean by that is that the books themselves exist within the world of the books. So Ruin of Kings is actually written by a character in Ruin of Kings. He is compiling together an account of what has happened. And because those books are diegetic, And because they are told from very, very distinct viewpoints, yeah, there's some information. Like, you're just never going to need to know who the mayor of Kishna-Farraga is. That's not going to come up. You know, who the prime god of that region is. You don't need to know. So, anyone else? Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit more about your relationship with the publisher? You indicated that they said yes. I guess your first volume, they wanted to know about the series. I'm kind of curious about how much time they gave you, how much pressure they put on you, if there were milestones for them that they wanted to see attained, and what that was like as a writer.
Right. Well, so when they sat me down to sign the initial contract, they said, can you get us a new book every 10 months? And I said, sure. Now, there's a reason I said sure, and that was I write fast. I have to write fast because I have a fair number of anxiety disorders. If I write slow, they have enough time to catch up with me and ambush me. So, you know, typically speaking, I will write, the plan is roughly 4,000 to 5,000 words a day. I guarantee you that somebody who writes slower writes better. I do a lot of revising. But that initial first draft, I write very fast. So 10 months seemed perfectly reasonable to me. I did not understand some things when I naively made that promise. I did not understand how the editing process would work. I did not understand that I would be traveling a lot. I would be going on book tours. I would be doing things that would not let me write. And I would be doing revisions on the previous book while I was trying to write the next book. So those were all things that I learned as I went. However, I did in fact release a book every 10 months. So, pretty proud of that. That goes especially dedicated to all of those people at the very beginning when Ruin of Kings was released, who told me that they did not buy fantasy series that were not finished because they'd been burned too many times. And I said, you realize that if you do that if everyone does that, those writers will never get past the first book because no publisher will keep publishing them. And they kind of, I don't hear from them again. But yeah. It was, I'm not going to lie, it was a stressful thing. They were wonderful. You know, the hardest part about it was honestly me thinking I couldn't push back, which is not the same thing as them not letting me push back. It is really difficult as a debut author to say no. You don't think you're allowed to. You are allowed to. I'm better about it now. But that first time, it was really tough.
You were talking about your editor, and you made it sound as if your editor's insight into how you write allowed you to make a transition that allowed you to become successful. Is that common or uncommon?
I don't really know how common it is. I adore Davy. Davy is sadly not my editor anymore because they promoted her to publisher of Tor. I'm still a little upset by that. But you know, she was what you would call a story editor. meaning she wasn't going through and looking for typos. She could care less. She was going through and saying, I think that thing that you did with that, this particular character weakens the story. Or she had a talent for absolutely annihilating my plans with like 5 words. It would be like just a little note in the margin. I don't understand why X. I'd be like, oh my God. I'm going to have to rewrite 30,000 words because of that. But she was very, very rarely wrong. There were moments, but mostly not. She definitely challenged me to be the best writer I could be, which is I fully appreciated. So I think coming from the background I did in video games did prep me to not be precious about my writing. The idea that it's okay to have to revise something or rewrite something or trash something. Discord of Gods, which is the last book in the series, the one that came out last year in August, there's 60,000 words that none of you have ever seen because there was an entire plot thread that got dropped. And I was mad about it when she suggested it, but I was like, okay, well, I'll just try taking those chapters out and I'll see what it does. And that was the book I was having the hardest problem with pacing on. And I took those chapters out. I hadn't even finished anything else yet, and I looked at it and I went, damn it. She's right again. So yeah, I had a fantastic relationship with her. And she was always extremely supportive of, anything I needed. On the other hand, she was also the one who volunteered me to do individual artwork in front of each chapter. So sometimes she asked a little bit.
That was actually my question. Oh, did someone else have a question? Go ahead.
It's completely off in a different direction from what you've been talking about, so yours is related.
Oh, okay, sorry. I was going to ask you your artwork, since your background is in art and illustration at one point. Did you include artwork in the book?
Yeah, I did all the maps and I did all of the artwork. There's an escutcheon on each chapter that is in some way related to the contents of that chapter. And because I am that nerd, there's 2 different chroniclers through the course of the series. They have 2 different art styles. Because of course they do. So their maps are different and their chapter art is different. Yeah, they were thrilled. Actually, my agent was the happiest I've ever seen him when I told him that I had maps. Because normally, you have to hire someone to do that. And when you hire someone to do that, you then have to make sure that that their contract includes and is compensated for selling that book and its artwork to other markets. It's just an additional layer of complication, and he didn't have to deal with that because it was still all mine. He was very happy. I didn't do the covers. The covers were done by Lars Grant West, who is a phenomenal artist, who I think he teaches out of, I want to say it's New York State, don't quote me, but he's amazing. And when we were talking about the very first book, Ruin of Kings, Davey called me up and said, I was thinking I might want to put a dragon on the cover. What do you think? And I said, are you expecting I'm going to tell you no? Because that's not going to happen. And other than that, all the covers have been extremely easy, except for the very last one, which the very last one, Davey and I were talking about it, and I don't actually remember which of us said it needs to be a skull, but one of us did, and the art director was like, no. And Davey and I were like, yes. So we actually had quite a bit of back and forth before we were able to convince him, no, needs to be a skull. You'll understand why. But yeah, sorry, you had something.
Well, I'm also kind of obsessed with dragons, so I wanted to ask, how did you imagine the dragons in your head? You said they weren't more like wyverns. I assume they're not more like Quetzalcoatl.
Okay, actually, so this is a really good, thank you, wonderful question. Let's go back to dragons. So in my quest to not have my dragons be like Dungeons and Dragons, I just decided to take them apart and start from scratch. And one of the first things that I decided to do was pay an homage to Tolkien and his dragons by having dragons that were forces of nature. So there are 8 dragons in the story, just 8. It's not a race. It's in fact the product of a curse, and each of those dragons is basically an elemental kaiju. There is a dragon made out of swords that shows up at one point. There is a dragon that is the personification of a volcano and breathes out a pyroclastic flow. The dragons are really large. They're really, 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 really large. And they're each unique. So, but they do have 4 legs and 2 wings. not 2 legs and 2 wings. But, again, that's just because I have opinions. But I had a lot of fun with them. It was so much fun having dragons that were monsters of mass destruction. And there was no way you were going to be able to just defeat them with a one-on-one fight. I wanted dragons that were so dangerous that nobody would casually talk about being able to take them out. I think I got that. Anyone else? You guys you're being wonderful. I mean, great questions. You're free to ask me. I mean, I'm by all means not the most experienced person when it comes to the publishing industry, but I'm willing to talk. Yes. Yes. So I have written a standalone fantasy novel. It is about dragons. It is actually not set on Omfer. It's not set in the same world as A Chorus of Dragons is, and it is about dragon riders. Very early on, like the very first novel, I remember a bunch of people coming up to me and being like, "Can we ride these dragons?" And I was like, "No. Oh God, no. You cannot ride these dragons. Under any circumstances, you cannot ride these dragons." And they're like, "Oh, we were hoping we could ride these dragons." I'm like, "Next time." Next time I'll have you ride these dragons. So I thought to myself, okay, well, let's do a book about dragon riders. But what if the dragons were actually really intelligent? What would that relationship look like? Book gets kind of dark. But I can't wait to share it because it's also really cool. And I'm very, very pleased with it. That said, I can't tell you when it's going to come out because I don't know. They haven't even said yes to it yet. They might decide they hate it. I don't know. I'm currently in an anxiety spiral about it. I also have a science fiction book that they're shaking their heads about because they're appalled that I don't want to do. I want to do something that's not fantasy. But my agent loves the book, and very sweetly said that if he hadn't signed me for the fantasy one, he'd have signed me for this one. It's very nice of him. Oh, yeah.
What happens if you and the editor disagree and just can't come to terms?
Well, that depends on what we're disagreeing on. There really isn't anything in my contract that says that I have to do what they tell me. And in fact, I have gotten into some fairly extreme arguments with, I had two editors, actually. I had a US editor and I had an UK editor. And the UK editor and I, she's a wonderful, wonderful woman, but we got into some serious spats, mostly over linguistics, specific language use. And there's a wonderful, wonderful word that I knew from my years as a graphic designer that came to play on this one called stet, which means leave it alone. I'm not changing it. And that word got used a lot. That said, there was very rarely, there was never an argument that was insurmountable. And the reason for that was because I feel very strongly that if I'm not going to make a change that an editor asks for, I got to justify it. I have to have an actual reason why I'm being this way. And they were always good with my justifications. In some cases it was, trust me, this character will be showing up again. I realize they only are here for one little tiny bit in this book, but they will be here back later. But yeah, we worked really well together, so it didn't really come up.
Do you want to take one more?
Sure, one more, anybody got any last? Yes?
Can you speak briefly about the role of magic as a form of technology?
Yes. Okay. So I did a thing with this book, with this series, that used to be very popular and has kind of fallen a little bit. No, it still happens. Which is the idea that sorry, I have to back up a little bit on this. Part of what a lot of things went in. We have books this big, all sorts of stuff can get crammed into it. These books can hold so much stuff. And part of it was my addressing a pet peeve that I had from tabletop role-playing games, which is that the ramifications of magic on economies, technologies, and societies is very rarely addressed because everybody wants it to feel like the Middle Ages. So even though these games will feature spells and magic systems that really should have profound, effects to the degree of inventing the telegraph or, any sort of other major technological shifts, very, very rarely do any of these games talk about that, talk about what that would do to a society, how magic can change a society, how magic, if magic is a technology that we just don't understand, then magic can also have the same effects on a society that technology can. And part of that went into that, into these books. Part of it was also, if you've ever played Dungeons and Dragons, you know that the idea of resurrection is a fairly common component. You can, if your character gets killed fighting the dragon, the rest of your party can, pull your body back to town to a temple, and priest is going to resurrect you. And I thought to myself, who controls that? What does that do to a society? Who gets to come back from the dead? Who doesn't get to come back from the dead? What happens to people when they have the power to decide that? literally who lives and who dies. Yeah, so that's all kind of background to it, but it's a really important background. This idea that that magic is just enough of a commodity, of an exploitable resource as anything else. We good? Good. Okay. Thank you guys so much for coming out. I really, really appreciate it. And thank you for listening to me, babble on. I'm going to go sign stuff now.